I opened the door and saw the courier. He had no idea he was holding a trigger. 12 pages later, my life was gone. The envelope wasn't thick. Just 12 cream-colored pages and a signature I used to know by heart. The courier smiled, oblivious. "Sign here, sir." I did. I always sign things without hesitation. Contracts, school forms, checks. Trust is a muscle I kept in shape. Maureen's handwriting on the return label was the first twist of the knife. No confrontation, no fight, just silence weaponized by law. The name, petitioner, Maureen E. Wallace. Respondent, Nathan J. Wallace looked sterile on the page, a wound dressed in legalese. Beneath it, a section marked informed parties stabbed deeper. Lily, our daughter, listed not just as aware, but as a supporter. She's supporting me in this decision. There was no note, no voice memo, not even one of those nervous, guilt-laced texts people send when they're about to ruin your life. Just that single line in Times New Roman, stating that my child had chosen her side. I stood in the doorway too long. The courier thanked me, whistled something cheerful, and walked away. The door clicked shut behind me. The silence was so full it buzzed. I walked to the kitchen counter and placed the envelope down like it was radioactive. Beside it, my watch. The second hand had stopped at 3:17 p.m. I didn't wind it. Some things aren't worth restarting. The kitchen smelled like old coffee and oranges. I noticed the fruit bowl still held 3 clementines. Maureen always ate them in 2s. I don't know why that detail gutted me. The air felt viscous, like I had to swim through it. I sat. The chair creaked like it, too, was exhausted from pretending everything was fine. She hadn't called. She hadn't warned me. Not even the decency of a lie. For a long time, I didn't move. I just stared at the envelope. 12 pages. That's all it took to erase 22 years. The dog's leash still hung by the door. The smell of her shampoo still lingered in the upstairs hallway. Her toothbrush was still in the holder, blue, soft-bristled, curled at the edges from chewing. We talked about retirement last month. I reread the words on the page, hoping they'd change. But they stayed as they were, final. I touched the edge of the paper like it might cut me. Maybe it had already. She never said sorry. I never asked. In the quiet, I heard the furnace kick on, the hum of the refrigerator. Everything normal. Everything shattered. I pressed my thumb against the date on the top page. March 17th. Same as the watch. Same as the timestamp in the email that must have gone to my junk folder. Same as the last real conversation we had. She said, "Let's not make this harder than it needs to be." She was pouring wine. Red. A California blend. She didn't offer me any. I remember the way her hand trembled when she picked up the glass. But not her voice. That was steady. "Let's not make this harder than it needs to be." Turns out that was the warning. That was the goodbye. I just didn't recognize it until the goodbye had already happened. I stared at the second hand, still frozen at 3:17. And I understood, in that moment, what grief really was. Not pain, not fury, not even loss. Just the sick, slow realization that the story ended while you were still reading the last chapter. She said it was a work trip, but I saw her. 2 wine glasses, 1 familiar smile, and a man I wasn't supposed to know. Bangkok at night glows like a secret. The skyline flickers with high-rise ambition, rooftop promises, and streets that don't sleep. It's a city that hums beneath your feet. All neon heat and unspoken things. I was there for numbers, for silence. A boardroom deal. Nothing poetic. But betrayal rarely arrives with poetry. It arrives with precision. The restaurant was 32 stories above the city, all glass railings and curated dusk. I only went because a colleague insisted. Said the view would clear the jet lag. Instead, it gave me Maureen. She wore a black dress. Simple, tailored, with an open back. The kind she never wore for me. Not since Lily turned 12 and our anniversaries turned into quick dinners. There were 2 wine glasses on the table, half full. One had a smudge of lipstick burgundy. Not her usual shade. Across from her sat a man I recognized instantly. tall, deliberate, graying at the temples like someone aging with calculation. Carter Brenning, her old boss. The one she used to say was brilliant but cold. The one she said she hadn't spoken to since 2019. They were close. Not touching, but you don't need contact to betray someone. Sometimes, proximity is enough. The way her hand lingered near his wine glass when she laughed. The way he leaned in, not for what she said, but for how she said it. Familiarity wrapped in flirtation. Rehearsed. Maureen tilted her head when he spoke. Just a little. I remembered that tilt. That was mine once. Back when I still made her laugh without trying. Back when she still wore perfume on purpose. She never saw me. Not in the crowd of sunset diners. Not with the shadow cutting across my face from the candlelight. I was just another passing stranger. Fitting, I suppose. I watched for 13 minutes. Long enough to memorize the slope of her shoulders. Long enough to realize I was no longer watching her. I was watching who she became without me. I took a photo. Quiet. No flash. Not for proof, I didn't need proof. The truth was already carving its name into my ribs. Back at the hotel, I stared at the image. Her face, mid-laugh. His eyes, fixed on her like a man watching a painting he used to own. Then I deleted it. Not out of mercy. Not out of fear. Because sometimes the truth doesn't scream. Sometimes it just waits. And when it arrives, it doesn't knock. It lets itself in. The next morning, she sent a text. Flight back was bumpy, but I'm home. Miss you. Hope Bangkok wasn't too boring. I stared at the blue heart. That was her default. Not red. Not gold. Blue. Maureen was always measured, even in affection. I didn't reply. I couldn't lie, and I wasn't ready to speak the truth. Not yet. Instead, I opened the minibar and poured something too expensive to taste. Outside the window, the city kept glowing. Kept whispering its secrets to anyone willing to look. She said it was a work trip. But work doesn't make you laugh like that. Work doesn't lean in. Work doesn't wear a black dress you never meant for your husband to see. It was the kind of letter a stranger writes. Polite, distant, and signed with love she didn't mean. The envelope was pale blue. No return address, but the handwriting was unmistakable. Upright, careful, and strangely calm. Lily had always dotted her eyes like tiny stars. This time they were circles, measured, empty. I opened it slowly, like peeling back gauze, as if the paper might bleed. She used lined stationery, the kind you buy in bulk, graduation gifts, polite thank yous, condolence notes. This was none of those, and yet it read like all of them at once. I've been thinking a lot about what happened between you and Mom, about how things ended. Already I knew. It wasn't a daughter writing to her father. It was a person trying not to take sides while secretly already having chosen. I believe both of you have your truths. I want to respect them. I hope we can move forward with kindness and mutual understanding. No mention of shared memories. No questions. No warmth. Just sterile phrases. Navigate. Evolve. Perspective. Words meant for therapists, not fathers. And then it came. Subtle. Surgical. Nathan. I hope you can find peace with this. Nathan. Not Dad. Not Daddy. Like when she scraped her knees on the gravel driveway. Not even Pop, the name she called me when she was being ironic. Just Nathan. Once. But once was all it took. It wasn't an accident. It was a boundary. An emotional border drawn in cursive. The rest of the letter tried to smooth over the incision. She wrote about grad school, her new apartment, the view from her window. She said she still had the bracelet I gave her for her 16th birthday, turquoise stones, her birth color. I wear it sometimes, she wrote, like it was an alibi. At the bottom, she signed it, Love Always. It was the always that broke me, because I could feel it wasn't true. Children don't unlearn love. Not unless someone teaches them how. I sat with the letter in my hands for a long time. I didn't cry. I just felt misfiled, like I'd been recategorized, not father, not enemy, but irrelevant. She hadn't written to comfort me. She had written to clear her conscience. As if silence had a moral cost, and this was the receipt. I folded the letter in half, then in half again. The crease split her name. I didn't tear it, I couldn't. Instead, I walked to the bookshelf and pulled down the old photo album, the red leather one with the fading gold corners. We used to fill it together: birthdays, ski trips, missing teeth, and crooked paper crowns from Christmas dinners. I hadn't opened it in years. The pages were mostly empty now. The ones we filled still smelled like glue and sunblock. But the back half was blank, waiting. I slid the letter into the final sleeve. A placeholder for what wasn't said. A keepsake for a version of her I no longer had access to. The truth is, I don't know when she stopped needing me. Maybe the day Maureen told her I'd changed. Maybe the first time she saw me cry and didn't know what to do with it. Maybe I stopped being her father long before I noticed. And this letter was just the confirmation slip. Some betrayals don't scream. They whisper your name once, then forget it ever belonged to you. I didn't take the test to hurt anyone. I took it to survive the question I couldn't unask. I didn't want proof. I wanted permission to stop wondering. But wondering is a parasite. It doesn't starve with time, it just learns to feed quieter. It began after the letter. After she called me Nathan. After I realized that memories weren't enough to guarantee blood. For a while, I told myself it was grief talking. Paranoia, not pattern. But late at night, when the house creaked and the silence deepened, the question repeated itself like a second heartbeat. What if she's not mine? I didn't tell anyone. I didn't research the kits online. I went to a pharmacy across town, paid in cash, used a bag with no logo. The box was nondescript. White, discreet, almost apologetic. It sat on my kitchen counter for 4 days. I didn't touch it. I just watched it like it might open on its own and whisper the truth. I used her old hairbrush. From the guest room. She stayed last winter, wore that oversized sweater with the sleeves too long, the one she used to steal from my closet. She made pancakes. Laughed at my Spotify playlist. Told me my kitchen still smelled like childhood. I remember thinking she still feels like mine. But feelings don't pass genetic tests. I mailed the envelope on a Tuesday. The post office smelled like paper and rain. My hands didn't shake. I didn't cry. It wasn't a dramatic moment, just a quiet one. That's the thing about despair. It rarely announces itself. It waits in line like everyone else. I felt like a traitor walking out of there. Like I'd broken some unspoken contract between fathers and daughters. But betrayal had already happened. I was just responding late. The results arrived in a white envelope with clean font. No warning. No apology. Just data. At the bottom in bold. Probability of paternity, 0%. The world didn't end. It simply tilted. Like someone had rotated it a few degrees and forgot to tell me. I reread the line 12 times. Not because I didn't understand, but because my brain refused to assign meaning. It was like reading a language you'd once known as a child but hadn't spoken in years. 0%. I expected fury. Or numbness. But what I felt was stranger. Relief. Because now at least the wondering had an address. I took the paper, folded it once, and walked upstairs to the study. The bookshelves creaked when I moved them. Behind them, the safe. I hadn't opened it in years. Birth certificates. Wills. A photo of Lily holding a balloon shaped like a dinosaur. All of it now haunted by that one decimal. I placed the results inside. Not to bury them, but to preserve them. Like an artifact from a previous life. Someday someone will find them. Maybe not Lily. Maybe not Maureen. Maybe someone else entirely. A lawyer, a new husband, a stranger sorting through old boxes. And they'll read the words. And maybe, just maybe, they'll understand what it costs to stay quiet. Some truths aren't meant to be spoken, but they still echo, even behind locked doors. Revenge is noisy, but disappearing is an art. And I've always been good with detail. They think I lost, that I folded, that I crumbled under weight they placed on me so casually they never stopped to ask if I could carry it. And I let them believe it. That's the brilliance of silence. It allows arrogance to speak freely. It lets people show you who they think you are. Maureen moved fast. She always did. She filed the division proposals with crisp efficiency. She brought the tone of someone handling a stubborn contractor. I met it with stillness. Stillness unnerves people like her. No outburst. No plea. Just numbers. I let her take the house. She thought it was weakness. It wasn't. It was a trade. Real estate for invisibility. For detachment. I gave her the foundation so I could vanish without making a sound. I rerouted my accounts over 4 days. I learned how to disappear from books, not people. Bangkok, Singapore, Zurich. Small transfers. Silent shifts. I made myself untraceable not by hiding but by becoming irrelevant. They expected footprints. I gave them shadows. When Lily called, it was dusk. The light made the kitchen look sepia, like an old memory trying to fade. She said my name softly, the way someone calls to a ghost. I told her I understood, that I wanted her to find peace. She cried. I didn't. You can't mourn something that never saw you. After we hung up, I sat for a while in the half-dark, surrounded by boxes I didn't plan to unpack. She wouldn't call again, and I wouldn't expect her to. Then I disappeared. Not from the world. From their world. The one where I was a husband. A father. A problem to manage. A photo to dust around. That version of me no longer exists. He was buried beneath custody forms and polite betrayals. I moved to a city where no one knew my name. I chose a small apartment above a bookstore. The woman downstairs waters my plants when I forget. Sometimes we talk about novels. Sometimes we don't. I walk without being recognized. I eat alone without being pitied. I sleep without waiting for someone to turn to me in the dark and remember I exist. And here's the part that stings, but not the way you think. They haven't even noticed. No missed calls. No letters. No second thoughts. Because when people erase you, they don't look back to check if you're still breathing. But I am. Breathing. Watching. Healing slowly. Disappearance is not absence. It's presence on your own terms. I didn't vanish to escape them. I vanished to find myself outside their definitions. And some nights when the wind rattles the windows just right, I smile. Because being forgotten by people who didn't see you isn't tragedy. It's freedom in disguise. It didn't hit me all at once. It was slow, like forgetting a language you once dreamed in. I didn't cry. Not in the way they warn you about, fists clenched, knees buckled, soaked pillows at midnight. No, my grief arrived through subtraction. I stopped seasoning my food. Not deliberately. I just forgot. Salt stayed in the cupboard like an old photograph, present but untouched. I let coffee grow cold, drank it anyway. The piano in the corner remained shut. For months. The keys gathered dust. Even silence has weight when it's earned. A light bulb in the hallway burned out. I didn't replace it. Just learned to walk in the dim. My world kept its shape, but lost its weight. They hadn't broken anything. Nothing cracked. Nothing fell. It was worse than that. They hollowed it. I used to be a man of structure. Black coffee. Morning jogs. Friday takeout with Lily. Now I woke at 4 a.m. for no reason and stood barefoot in the kitchen, listening to the refrigerator hum like it had something important to say. Maureen took her absence like a victory. A sculptor proud of the void she'd carved. Lily's silence felt like permission. Like she was saying, yes, he deserves this. Some nights I forgot how to speak in full sentences. My voice sounded foreign when I read old texts aloud. Like mimicking someone I used to be. And then, one night, I walked into the garage. 29 years of tools. Lined up like soldiers. Wrenches, clamps, driver sets. The wood-handled hammer I used to build her dollhouse. The red toolbox she decorated with stickers when she was 5. I picked up the first tool I ever bought, a rusted socket wrench. I used it to fix Lily's crib. I turned it over in my hand. It still bore the mark, a scratch from when I dropped it on the tile floor back when she was too small to hold her own head up. I placed it in a cardboard box. Labeled it, donate. Then I picked up the rest. One by one. Quietly. Reverently. Not because they were useless, but because they belonged to a life I no longer occupied. This wasn't a spiral. It was a shedding. Every item I let go of felt like removing a coat I'd been sweating under for years. They hadn't just left me. They'd released me. There's a difference between being abandoned and being unburdened. I used to think survival meant holding on. Now I know sometimes it means letting go before the weight breaks you. I realized I didn't want her back. I didn't want answers. I wanted out. The funny thing about clarity. It doesn't arrive with thunder. It arrives with stillness. A silence so complete it stops mimicking grief and starts sounding like peace. I was folding a shirt. Navy blue. Too tight. One of the last Maureen had bought me. I stared at it for a full minute. Not with resentment. Just curiosity. It didn't belong to me anymore. None of it did. The taste she chose for me. The person I tried to be to deserve it. I dropped the shirt into the donation bin and it made no sound. Funny how objects stop making noise once they're no longer part of your identity. I opened the safe. The one behind the bookshelves, still smelling faintly of dust and lavender. The DNA results weighted like a truth that no longer needed to hurt. I reread the final line. Probability of paternity, 0%. This time, it didn't cut. It clarified. The number wasn't pain. It was precision. A mirror that finally stopped lying. Not a father. Not even a shadow of one. Not to her. And for the first time, I didn't want to be. I didn't want to fix it. I didn't want her back. I didn't want justice. I wanted out. That realization felt like stepping outside during snowfall. Quiet, clean, and a little too bright. I sat at the kitchen table with a pen and a sheet of linen paper. Wrote the kind of letter that doesn't demand anything. No anger. No history. Just a key taped inside to the Bangkok condo. The one she didn't know I still had access to. She could use it. Or not. That wasn't my concern anymore. At the bottom, I signed my name. Clean. No flourish. Just a full stop. I slipped the envelope into a larger one and dropped it off with my lawyer that afternoon. She didn't ask what was inside. That's the gift of a good lawyer. They know when a client isn't closing a case, but a chapter. That was the moment. Right there with the letter in her outbox. The moment I stepped out of the story they wrote for me. For years, I'd been trapped in their narrative. Husband. Father. Failure. Footnote. But that version of me, the man who waited for apologies, who studied silences like they were scripture, who begged truth from those who hoarded it. He died in that office. I walked out lighter. Not free, not yet. But unanchored. Sometimes freedom doesn't come from walking away. It comes from realizing you were never really there to begin with. When Maureen opened the envelope, she thought it was another asset transfer. It wasn't. It was the truth hand-delivered by time. She asked for more. More equity. More shares. More of a future she had never planned to include me in. By then, the settlement had become a theater of manners, polite language for sharp demands. She assumed I was retreating. But I had already left. The envelope was handed to her during mediation. Plain. No weight to it. Not in paper, at least. She assumed it was an addendum. Some technical amendment. Another thing to win. But it wasn't. Inside, the DNA report. Folded once. Clean. The numbers spoke without commentary, 0%. No rage. No message. Just math. I wasn't there to see her hands tremble. But I was told they did. Not violently, just enough to be noticed. Just enough for the silence in the room to feel full. She didn't expect I'd kept it. She didn't expect I'd deliver it. And then came the letter. Not long. Just words, neutral in tone. My name at the bottom, no bitterness stitched to it. No plea. Just the key, the Bangkok condo taped inside. Not a gesture of reconciliation. Just a closing line in a book she assumed I hadn't read. There was no scene. No denial. Because there was nothing to deny. It wasn't a confession. It was a reveal. I imagine she looked around afterward. At the house I let her keep. The holdings I didn't contest. The legal ground she thought she'd conquered. And realized, perhaps for the first time, I hadn't lost. I had left. She wasn't negotiating with the broken. She was arguing with absence. And absence, when it arrives with composure, is a kind of power people don't know how to fight. The truth had been sitting quietly the whole time. She just hadn't noticed. The irony? The more she took, the freer I became. There's a kind of peace that only comes when you no longer need to be understood. I gave her the silence she thought she wanted, and filled it with everything she didn't expect. I wasn't grieving them. I was grieving who I thought I was. I sat on the balcony of the new condo. The air smelled of sea salt and jasmine. Somewhere in the distance, a boat carved white lines across the bay like a signature nobody would read. 3 months since the settlement. No emails. No letters. Lily hadn't reached out. And I didn't blame her. She'd built her truth from a script Maureen handed her. Typed margins, familiar phrasing, heroes and villains cleanly divided. I could have torn it apart, shown her the edits, the missing pages. But I didn't. Sometimes protecting someone means letting them keep the story that makes sense. Even if it erases you. The watch on my wrist had no second hand. I chose it on purpose. Nothing was ticking anymore. No court dates. No calls. No anniversaries disguised as obligations. I didn't need to track time. Only to live in it. Now and then, I open the photo album. Not to reminisce. To remind myself. Most of the pages are still blank. Not out of laziness. Not forgetfulness. But because I always told myself we'd fill them later. Later when work slowed down. Later when she apologized. Later when Lily asked about her childhood and wanted to remember it with me. Later never came. Now I keep the album on the lowest shelf. Not hidden. Just still. Like something sacred that no longer needs to be prayed to. They didn't take the house. Or the car. Or even the title of father. They took the illusion. The belief that love guaranteed belonging. That memory meant meaning. That being good would be enough. And in its place, something else grew. Quietly. Stubbornly. Peace. Not the kind you earn. Not the kind that arrives with applause. But the kind that settles into your bones when you stop asking why. The kind that whispers. It happened. And you're still here. They never saw the shift. Because when I disappeared, I didn't leave a hole. I left a mirror. I'm not angry. That's what surprises people most, the few I've allowed inside the story. They expect fury. Fire. The need to shout what was taken. But there's no rage left. Just stillness. And the quiet satisfaction of seeing things clearly, finally, fully. Maureen still lives in the house. The one with the white shutters and the creaky step she never asked me to fix. I imagine she hosts dinners now. Laughter echoing off the backsplash we picked out together. I imagine Carter brings the wine. Maybe something bold. Maybe something French. They probably toast to new beginnings. They think they won. They think I vanished in shame. That I couldn't bear the weight of what they did. But I didn't vanish. I transformed. The man they betrayed, he existed. He was loyal. He was patient. He believed in things like unconditional love and shared futures. But that man died in pieces quietly across courtroom chairs and empty phone calls and letters signed without conviction. And the man who took his place? He doesn't announce his exits. He doesn't argue over narratives. He leaves no final letters. No warnings. No need. Just distance. Not the kind measured in miles, but in understanding. Because once you see someone clearly, you can't unsee them. And once you see yourself clearly, the version of you they used, bent, and rewrote, you no longer beg to be part of their story. You walk out of it. That's what they never noticed. They were too busy watching for drama, waiting for a reaction, expecting fire. But fire is predictable. What they never prepared for was absence. And that's the thing about walking away in silence. You don't leave a hole. You leave a mirror. And if they ever dare look into it, if Maureen ever stops arranging her curated life long enough to really see, she'll find me there. Not broken. Not begging. Just gone. Because the greatest act of power isn't making them feel what they made you feel. It's disappearing before they ever realize the door was open.